This is about nonfiction and JMcPhee. The choice of subject matter is so crucial to a nonfiction writer. It's his bride or her groom. They don't always live happily ever after. I just finished a book of essays by Chuck Klosterman, and one of them was 10,000 words he proudly devoted to the musical group Kiss, including a detailed and rated review of every piece of music they produced, together and individually. It was a stretch, but I did read the entire thing, and then did my best to put it behind me. I was somewhat put out with Chuck. Robert Caro wrote a book about Robert Moses, and I found it very long and stunning. Years later, I thought I should take a look at his biography of Lyndon Johnson, considered a masterwork, in 4 volumes. Much of what I read was superb, including the hardship of life in rural Texas before the advent of electricity, but Caro fervently despised several aspects of Johnson's character, so much so that he injected himself directly into the book as a scold, and after this happened a number of times, I put the book down and did not return to it, nor its subsequent volumes. JMcPhee is well known and greatly admired for taking obscure and seemingly unpromising material, bringing it out of the dark, dusting it off, and letting it shine, finding the prince in the toad, as it were, putting the extra in the ordinary, all without blowing the bugle of new journalism, consuming massive quantities of drugs, or calling himself Sagittarius. His persona in the welter of books he's published is always affable and amiable, possibly to an excessive degree. His young children appear to point out his deficiencies, rather like the elves might criticize Santa, even though it is abundantly clear that they adore him. McPhee reminds me of the underwater explorer Robert Ballard or the wide receiver Jerry Rice. They all know how to go deep and find what they are looking for. They are thorough, decisive, and not easily deterred, and they were, without question, more concerned with reaching their goals than they were in any personal glory. George Plimpton and his hovering upper-crust patina also comes to mind. McPhee's writing is liberally sprinkled with visual metaphors, as where he compares a golf ball plugged in a sand trap to a fried egg. He also favors arcane terminology like multiguously, and when that is tacked onto his oddball selection of rarefied subjects, that means his writing can be both rewarding and challenging, demanding and delicious. Sometimes he goes too far for my taste. I'm virtually certain he would agree, without reserve or regret, with that assessment. Going too far is what he admires. Going too far is his goal. In the book of his that I just read, Silk Parachute, there is a lovely piece on the chalk that forms the white cliffs of Dover, goes under the Channel and into France, nourishing vineyards, and up into Europe. Then there is a longish piece on lacrosse, including the history, the exclusivity, especially in Baltimore and Long Island, the equipment, particularly the strings in the nets, and the current expansion. This was far too much for me, and if he were telling me this at a social gathering, I'm quite sure I would have dozed off. Even though it is quite interesting and profoundly detailed and informative at every turn, I'm still snoozing. Then he writes an essay about his daughter, a photographer who collaborates mostly with another woman using a large format Deardorff camera. Think Matthew Brady. Again, while the long exposure time is fascinating and their work is in many museums, talking about the work is rather like watching butchers make sausage. It verges on, flirts with, boredom. And then, as if to really throw down the gauntlet, McPhee writes an essay on fact-checking, using anecdotes from his many years as a writer for the New Yorker. This is going into a cave and finding the blind fish. A blurb on the back of the book says, "Is there any subject McPhee can't make interesting?" is the refrain. No, is the answer. It seems to me that question was the driving engine of his career. Out of humdrum stuff, wool, and vegetable dyes, he sought to weave Persian carpets with 600 knots per square inch. Tedious work with a beautiful result.